My name is Lou, and this is Literature with Lou. So we're going to get started today with Frost at Midnight by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. So we're going to start by just reading it through, and then we're going to go line by line. It's a pretty short poem, but I still think it's very interesting. All right, let's do the first stanza. The frost performs its secret ministry, unhelped by any wind. The owlet's cry came loud, and hark again, loud as before. The inmates of my cottage, all at rest, have left me to that solitude, which suits obtruser musings, save that at my side, my cradled infant slumbers peacefully. 'Tis calm indeed, so calm that it disturbs and vexes meditation with its strange and extreme silentness. Sea, hill, wood, this populous village, sea and hill and wood, with all the numberless goings on of life, inaudible as dreams. The thin blue flame lies on my low burnt fire and quivers not, only that film which fluttered on the grate. So firstly, one thing to notice is this line, which is talking about his son Hartley. And also just to mention that he's talking about himself in adulthood in this particular stanza. And also it's good to notice the thin blue flame that lies in the low burnt fire, because that will come back. So let's go line by line. The frost performs its secret ministry. So we already see this mention of ministry, which and connection to frost, which is a natural process. So we can kind of assume that this is going to have pantheistic undertones. Unhelped by any wind, the owlet's cry came loud, and hark again, loud as before. The inmates of my cottage all at rest. Cottage, again, it has very like natural imagery, and it's very prevalent in like Wordsworth's poetry, and he's obviously very much into pantheistic themes. Have left me to that solitude which suits obtruser musings, save that at my side, my cradled infant slumbers peacefully. So he's alone except with his child. Excuse me. 'Tis calm indeed, so calm that it disturbs and vexes meditation with its strange and extreme silentness. So I think it's interesting that he uses this word strange here. It kind of reminds me of Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, kind of having this strange power of speech. And I also think the line meditation kind of brings you back to spirituality. So perhaps it's this strange silentness that is sort of akin to spirituality. It's sort of supernatural in a way. Sea, hill, and wood, this populous village, sea, hill, and wood. I think the fact that he repeats this here, he's kind of emphasizing that all that's really around him is this village and then these natural aspects of the surrounding landscape, with all the numberless goings on of life, inaudible as dreams. This line really reminds me of Tintern Abbey, which is interesting because we have, like I said, a lot of pantheistic and natural themes. The thin blue flame lies on my low burnt fire and quivers not, only that film which fluttered on the grate. Again, note the film, note the thin blue flame. Okay, stanza 2. Still flutters there the soul unquiet thing. Methinks its motion in this hush of nature gives its dim sympathies with me who live, making it a companionable form, whose puny flaps and freaks the idling spirit by its own moods interprets everywhere, echo or mirror seeking of itself, and makes a toy of thought. So I think it's very interesting that spirit and thought are capitalized here. We can kind of, if we're operating under the idea that Coleridge is kind of connecting to nature in a spiritual way, then spirit and thought, maybe they're capitalized because he sees them closer to God than maybe God itself. Okay, let's go line by line again. Still flutters there the soul unquiet thing. Methinks its motion in this hush of nature gives its dim sympathies with me who live. Again, unquiet, but the hush of nature. It's kind of interesting, and it's just another paradox, or a paradox that we see. This is obviously very common to romantic poetry, and very common for Coleridge. Making it a companionable form, whose puny flaps and freaks the idling spirit by its own moods interpret everywhere, echo or mirror seeking of itself, and makes toy of thought. So this is kind of this film or this flame that's flickering. It's taking on this other role. It's no longer just like at the grate of the fire. It's taking on the role of the spirit. It's taking on the role of the thought. But oh, how oft at school with most believing mind, presageful have I gazed upon the bars to watch the fluttering stranger. And as oft with unclosed lids, already had I dreamt of my sweet birthplace, the old church tower whose bells, the poor man's only music, rang from morn to evening, all the hot fair day so sweetly that they stirred and haunted me, with a wild pleasure, falling on mine ear, most like articulate sounds of things to come. So gazed I, till the soothing things I dreamt lulled me to sleep, and sleep prolonged my dreams. And so I brooded all the following morn, awed by the stern preceptor's face, mine eye fixed with mock study on my swimming book, save if the door hath opened, and I snatched a hasty glance, and still my heart leaped up, for still I hope to see the stranger's face, townsman or aunt or sister more beloved, my playmate when we both were clothed alike. So we should mention this part, my sweet birthplace, which would be Devon in England. And he's talking about how often at school he kind of was looking for this stranger, this, as we kind of talked about here, this flame or this just sort of constant in his life that's taking on a supernatural role. And so it's important to note that when Coleridge was young, he was sent off to Christ's Hospital, which was his school, and he didn't really go back home to Devon too often. So he obviously did feel the disconnect. So we should think about that when reading. But oh, how oft at school with the most believing mind, presageful, have I gazed upon the bars. Okay, with most believing mind, this just makes me think that he kind of had hope even when he was young in this spirit. It almost feels like he's reminiscing on how innocent he used to be or how much hope he used to have that maybe he doesn't have now. To watch the fluttering stranger. Stranger here, fluttering stranger, it's obviously referring to the film that we talked about earlier, but now stranger is a very interesting word because it's kind of vague, but it's also in italics. So it's different from the rest of the text, which just makes me think that again, it's this force that's supernatural. It's different than anything else in his life. And as oft with unclosed lids, already had I dreamt of my sweet birthplace. So he's thinking about this even when he isn't sleeping. You know, it's just a constant thing. He's daydreaming. And the old church tower, whose bells, the poor man's only music, rang from morn to evening, all the hot fair day so sweetly that they stirred and haunted me, with a wild pleasure falling on mine ear. Wild pleasure reminds me a lot of Tintern Abbey, this kind of wild pleasure that you feel, that you kind of have to reconcile with nature and kind of be able to recreate that within solitude. More like articulate sounds of things to come. So gazed I till the soothing things I dreamt lulled me to sleep, and sweet sleep prolonged my dreams. And so I brooded all the following morn, awed by the stern preceptor's face, mine eye fixed with mock study on my swimming book. He's not focusing clearly. We see this here. He can't focus in school. He's so focused on his home and on the stranger that he's waiting on, this kind of supernatural thing that he craves. Save if the door half opened and I snatched a hasty glance, and still my heart leaped up, for still I hoped to see the stranger's face, townsman or aunt or sister more beloved, my playmate, when we both clothed alike. Dear babe, that sleepest cradled by my side, whose gentle breathings heard in this deep calm, fill up the interspersed vacancies and momentary pauses of the thought. My babe so beautiful, it thrills my heart with tender gladness, thus to look at thee, and think that thou shalt learn far other lore, and in far other cities. For I was reared in great city pent mid cloisters dim, and saw not lovely but the sky and stars. But thou, my babe, shalt wander like a breeze by lakes and sandy shores, beneath the crags of ancient mountain, and beneath the clouds, what image of their bulk, both lakes and shores, and mountain crags, so shalt thou see and hear the lovely shapes and sounds intelligible of the eternal language, which thy God utters, who from eternity doth teach himself in all things in himself. Great universal teacher, he shall mold thy spirit, and by giving make it ask. So this whole stanza is addressed to Hartley. It's talking, this stanza is the past, and this stanza is the present, obviously. And I think it's very, very interesting that thou is italicized, just like stranger, kind of saying that unlike Coleridge, Hartley's going to have this experience. He's going to be able to be tutored by nature as opposed to within a great city pent mid cloisters dim. He's kind of thinking about his time and how he would like to do it differently with his son. Let's do line by line now. Dear babe, that sleepest, cradled by my side, whose gentle breathings heard in this deep calm. I think this line, deep calm, kind of goes back to this quiet that nature kind of presents. So that's interesting. Fill up the interspersed vacancies and momentary pauses of the thought, my babe so beautiful it thrills my heart. So he's thinking about his son constantly. With tender gladness thus to look at thee, and think that thou shalt learn far other lore, and in far other cities. I also think lore is an interesting word here because it kind of, in my mind, entails this long history and more, I guess, non-mainstream learning experiences and information that's being learned or passed along. So clearly that matches up with this. For I was reared in the great city, pent mid cloisters dim, and saw not lovely but the sky and stars. But thou, my babe, shalt wander like a breeze by lakes and sandy shores, beneath the crags of ancient mountain and beneath the clouds. So he's saying, I was raised here in this city, longing for my home, but you're going to be raised by nature. You're going to be raised in nature. Nature will be your teacher. Which image in their bulk both lakes and shores, and mountain crags, so shalt thou see and hear the lovely shapes and sound intelligible of that eternal language which thy God utters. So of eternal language, it's something far longer lasting than any education you could get at Christ Hospital. And which thy God, it's not Coleridge's God because he can't hold on to this stranger. He wants to, but it's going to be Hartley's because he's going to be raised with it. Who from eternity doth teach himself in all things in himself. Great universal teacher, he shall mold thy spirit, and by giving make it ask. So this, in my mind, great universal teacher, by giving make it ask. He's kind of preparing this. Nature will prepare Hartley for something better. Hartley will be able to teach it to, or something along those lines. Let's do the final stanza. Therefore all seasons shall be sweet to thee, whether the summer clothe the general earth with greenness, or the redbreast sit and sing betwixt the tufts of snow on the bare branch of mossy apple tree, while the night thatch smokes in sun thaw, whether the eve drops fall, heard only in trances on the blast, or in the sacred ministry of frost, shall hang them up in silent icicles, quietly shining to the quiet moon. Again, these themes of it being quiet in nature, which is really just the antithesis of growing up in a city. So we can see with those lines and the lines above that he's just wanting something different than his childhood. Therefore, all seasons shall be sweet to thee, whether the summer clothe the general earth with greenness, or the redbreast sit and sing betwixt the tufts of snow. So he's kind of saying here that, no matter what time of year it is, you're going to prosper because you're being taught by nature, which is just, again, the antithesis of what he went through. On a bare branch of mossy apple tree, while the night thatch smokes in the sun thaw, whether the eve drops fall, heard only in the trances of the blast, or if the secret ministry of the frost shall hang them up in silent icicles, quietly shining in the quiet moon. Again, secret ministry of the frost. It's also very interesting that secret is still used because it kind of reinforces this idea that Coleridge can't really obtain what Hartley's going to be able to obtain because he's kind of been harmed by the outside world, so to speak. So, I mean, this poem is very interesting. I think you can read it in a lot of different ways. I just kind of think it is reminiscent of his childhood and how he wishes better for his child, which is a very common thought, but also this kind of longing to be a part of something that Hartley has access to. It's also interesting to note that Coleridge was away when Hartley was born, and he felt very guilty and anxious about that, and he was worried that his son might die. And he always harbored this anxiety around his children and their impending doom or deaths. So it's interesting to note that he wants better for them. He's craving this for them because he's obviously very anxious that they will, maybe that like life will just get to them. So he wants something good to come their way. Anyway, but thank you for reading this with me, and I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you later.